many people are wondering if the president really is aware of what Nigerians are facing today. Is he?
Absolutely. The president is quite aware, and what validates that awareness is the fact that we see quite a number of reforms taking place in various sectors. But alongside those reforms, we have policies and programs that in direct response to the pains Nigeria are going through. Recall very clearly that subsidy was gone even before Mr. President was sworn in, because he's a man that places primacy on data and figures. And of course, he received briefings. He saw clearly even the provision for subsidy was no longer in the books. So it is a president that was clearly upfront. There's no more subsidy. And from the get-go, he leveled with Nigerians to say there's no more subsidy. But moving forward, we've seen quite a number of programs and initiatives that are ongoing. We've seen a number of reforms that are ongoing. And I keep saying it. There's a benchmark. We've had countries that were oil-rich countries before. God forbid, we don't want Nigeria to go the way of Venezuela. But also you look at Indonesia, you look at Malaysia, they oil-rich countries, and they also removed subsidy. And their experience is no different from ours. And we have clear indicators about the response of the Nigerian government under President Tinubu to make sure that the pain that the people have to go through during this period is lessened. And I can go on and just list some of these initiatives. Some of them are already impactful. Some of them are ongoing. Some of them in the short term, you can point to a couple of things. Some of them in the long term. And I think that when you look at Indonesia, for example, they removed their subsidy in phases, but it didn't lessen the pain. Of course, they had to bring in some social safety programs. They had to provide support for their citizens at various levels. And when you look at where Indonesia is now, from 2015 to 2023, they've moved from crisis to stability, economic stability, political stability. They paid a price. There's a price to be paid for development. And the projection by the World Bank is that by the end of this year, they will be necking 5.1 to 5.4 GDP.
I like how you use Indonesia, but let's bring it back to Nigeria, because that's what we're talking about. They paid the price. It wasn't just the people who paid the price. The government officials also paid the price. The sacrifice was all round. And in the case of Indonesia, it was a collective. In Nigeria, the presidency has bought a yacht. They've bought planes. They've bought cars that cost billions for the president, for his wife. They're renovating the house of the vice president. And several of these kinds of things, they're telling us to tighten our belts, but then they themselves are not tightening their belts. So if you're telling the people to continue, because it looks like, and I'm speaking obviously from the way I receive these messages every day on the radio, these people call and dump on us. It seems that there are people.
I read these messages on social media.
Exactly.
I listen to radio.
So if the government keeps telling us to keep tightening our belt and make these sacrifices, and we don't see them leading by example, what I mean, does it make any sense?
Some of the latest developments, have clearly shown the president's commitment to cost-saving governance. And some of them are not even right there in the open. For instance, we had the president about 2 months ago reduce the number of trips that ministers can make overseas to reduce the cost of governance. We also had him last week reduce the number of security aids they're going to have, and also the number of vehicles in their convoy. That's one. Two, we talk about these two. We've also seen that money saved from subsidy have gone into various pipes. The first pipe is FAC. The money that's shared it's increased by almost 47 to 49%. And the subnationals are also critical. It's easy to just blame the government. We run a federal government. Revenue is shared centrally. We have governors taking 47%, almost 3 times the amount they normally take as FAC. And they have a responsibility to go back, and also because we're running a system. And beyond that, we see these programs from the consumer credit scheme. We see the CNG program. We see the NEL fund programs into hundreds of billions. These are programs that are expected to help the Nigerian people, the youth, and across board. And we've seen milestones for most of these programs. You look at the credit, consumer credit, the credit corp, as they call it, the lowest interest rate ever, 4%. Our civil servants have never had such opportunities. About 11,000 of them have received funds from this. 25,000 others are waiting in line. The target is 500,000 civil servants. That is exceptional. You look at NEL fund, because the last one of our youth, when bursary disappeared, we had several of our young people in universities struggling. This president came up with the idea and signed the fund for NEL fund. As we speak, over 100 institutions have received funding. And the number of our young people in universities receiving this course across the country is massive, and that will be ongoing. These are the kind of programs we also put in place as a safety valve because of the removal of subsidy. But beyond the removal of subsidy, we inherited a country that needed fixing in several respects. And I keep saying it, this is a president that places primacy on data. He consumes data. He's followed governance over time. And he says, I've identified these key areas. So it's easy to just blame subsidy for everything. But did we have a perfect country when he took over? No, it's always a work in progress.
This president led that very famous protest, Occupy Nigeria. And it was against the removal of subsidy. It's not verified. It didn't happen just before I was born. It happened while I was still alive. And recently, the NSA came out sometime to give an interview saying that he knew that particular protest was political. He knew that subsidy should have been removed. He knew that it was political, and he was apologizing. And then, of course, all of a sudden, the president has this bright idea to remove subsidy, the same subsidy that he kicked against when we even had a better situation as opposed to now.
Well, let me say this. You look at the conditions that existed at that time, some years back. You look at our GDP then. You look at the revenue from oil then. We're talking about 10 years back. You look at the economic challenges at that period. That was a period in which Nigeria could well afford the provision of subsidy. And he took that position based on the facts that were available.
Really?
He was not president then. 10 years down the road, will you say the data about Nigeria's growth, the data about government revenue 10 years ago is the same now? Or is it a increased population? And then the demand on our resources and the challenge we have in its allocation. Will you say our national cake is getting bigger or shrinking? So when confronted with a critical situation, you must find a way to chart a critical path out of that situation. And some of the decisions you will take will not ordinarily be pleasant. And then I also say, leaders have a choice to basically not take any decision at all and let things just slide away. And other leaders have a choice to say, I will take a decision for the sake of this country. It might be tough at the beginning, but this is a president that is confident that these reforms beyond the oil subsidy, other reforms that are lined up, will lead Nigeria into a better future.
I'll let you answer.